Peace be with you, brothers and sisters. Yeah, I know you have the right to remain silent, but don't like that, leh. Okay, let's try this again. Peace be with you, brothers and sisters. Now, we have come to the second sermon topic on the sermon series on law, and the second topic will be on rights. And the topic of rights, no, the slide before, thank you. And the topic of rights somewhat overlaps with the first sermon, which is on authority. And indeed, there is some overlap because both rights and authority will derive power from law. And since we are talking about law, we will talk about these two concepts that both derive power from law. But the difference between authority and rights is that those in authority is given power because they have responsibilities to execute. Whereas those with rights are given power so that they can preserve what is inherent to that person's status. All right, so you can say that rights is dependent on who you are. For example, as a church member, then you have membership rights here. All right, and as a citizen, you will have civil rights, and then as a human, you should have human rights, and so on. Now, since this is a sermon series on law, we will first focus on the legalization of rights. All right, so we will not talk everything about rights, but we will focus on the legalization process especially. Now, the law's basic role is to ensure that the rights in terms of security, in terms of securing essential needs, well, these rights have to be protected by the law. But the truth is, different people will see what is essential needs differently. And because of this difference in opinion, what is considered an essential need? The topic of rights is therefore never without controversy. That's what we see today. For example, not every citizen of every country will have voting rights. And each country will also limit what we call the freedom of religion in various different ways. So today, actually, I will not dwell into each and every controversy that surrounds the topic of rights. That would be impossible for the scope of this sermon. What I hope to aim to do today is really to help us think theologically. All right, so this is what I hope to do today, to help us think theologically on this subject, and more specifically to think about how we can apply it to our lives when we say, faith in praxis, living in faith. How do we think theologically and apply our thoughts in terms of living our Christian life? So this is what I hope to achieve today. So let us first start by analyzing our world today. The truth is, it has been almost 200 years of civil and human rights movement. If you think, probably, okay, I'll cover this later, but more or less, it has been 200 years of this rights movement. And we can see, therefore, with the hindsight of 200 years, we can see how these developments have influenced society today. And the truth is, the development has, I would say, mostly been positive. In countries where the citizens are successful in gaining such rights, whether it's civil rights, whether it's human rights, the positives are actually very evident. Democratic countries will therefore allow the citizens to choose their own government. And since the government is elected by the people, they will therefore create laws that will try to cater to the interests of the people, represent the interests of the people. And for example, in Singapore, we try to live up to our pledge, to be united regardless of race, language, or religion, and therefore the government will work towards protecting such rights. And while not everybody can be equal, that's not possible. Not everybody can be equal in terms of our standard of living, but at least we hope to be equal in the eyes of the law in the pursuit of our happiness. And that is what the law is supposed to do. And so my first point in terms of thinking theologically would be that as Christians, we should be supportive of such transformation. At the very basic level, I believe that our Christian faith is aligned with the fight for civil rights, with the fight for human rights. And this alignment is based on two theological principles. The first is that we believe all humans are made in the image of God, which means that therefore we are inherently of worth. We are worthy people as long as we are a human, regardless of race, regardless of gender. And hence we believe that maintaining human dignity is therefore a justifiable need. So just now we say, what is essential need? Well, to maintain human dignity as a human, that we say, according to the Christians, since we are made in the image of God, that is a justifiable need. And secondly, the second theological principle is that we believe that our God is just. He's a God of justice. And He's the defender of the powerless. Now, if you remember from Luke chapter 10, there is an expert of the law who came to ask Jesus, who is my neighbor, right? That means, who do I need to take care of, who I don't need to love as my neighbor lah. Essentially, that's why he's asking. And Jesus then said the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he concluded this parable with this answer, the answer to the question, who is my neighbor? And Jesus answered, to whom are you a neighbor to? So the question is not who is my neighbor, but rather who can you be a neighbor to? So this teaches us from Jesus that the value of a person is not bound by nationality, it's not bound by language, it's not even bound by religion. Anybody can be our neighbor in their moment of need. And our response will be one of neighborly compassion, neighborly assistance. So I would say that anything that promotes preserving human dignity, anything that promotes justice for all, that should have our Christian support. We are theologically aligned with all such rights movement. Now, having said that, that is a very important ground. Having said that, we should also be aware of the potential negatives that are associated with rights language. So now I'll look at the negative side. And the main negative is what we see today, escalating conflict over power. So when we talk about rights, we then talk about power, and when we talk about power, we will talk about conflict. And the most obvious example of such negatives of rights language is America. I'm sure all of you are familiar. Now, if I may quote from Stanford Encyclopedia, so this is American. This is what one Stanford Encyclopedia says. It seems no accident that America, the land of rights, is also the land of litigation. America, the land of rights, is also the land of litigation. So you can see quite clearly today, the rights to guns, your rights to guns will infringe on what? My rights to public safety. Your right to free speech will infringe on my rights to be what? Harassment free. And both of these are all rights claims. When all these rights claim they conflict, the result will be what? Will be politics. Everything will be politicized, and it's a zero-sum game. It's either I win or you lose. It's either I gain or you gain. That's always like this. So in terms of when we think about this legalization of rights, for it to be done in my favor, it will mean that therefore what? I will need political power in order to win. So we have to ask the question. So today, as we think theologically, we have to understand this inherent nature about rights. Rights is always a matter of contention. I say again, rights is always a matter of contention. That means you have to fight for it. You cannot gain a right without a fight. So that is what we must be clear about. And to help us see this, let's trace the entire legalization process of rights throughout history. And you will see that has always been the case. To gain a right, you need to fight for your rights. Most scholars will say that the first establishment, the first formal legalization of right, that starts from the Magna Carta. And Magna Carta is what first established individual freedom. For example, you have the right to free trial. Where did that come from? That comes from the Magna Carta 800 years ago. And why was it formed? How do you get this legalization done? It was drafted to protect the noble families from the king. All right, so because all the barons, they were afraid of the power of the king, and in the conflict, they drafted the Magna Carta to protect this right. And the truth be told, the royal family, the king, only relented because there was a power struggle, and he relented only to stay in power so that he can continue to be king now. Then I will give you the freedom in terms of a free trial, for example, giving these free rights for the first time. And we see that even though the Magna Carta was written only 800 years ago, it took another 6 centuries, 600 years later, before the concepts of rights start to gain momentum, and that is at the French Revolution. And how did the French start to have so-called civil rights, human rights? That's only when they managed to overthrow the French monarchy. And if you know about the French Revolution, it's an extremely violent revolution. The concept of guillotine, right? That's at French Revolution. And after the French Revolution is the American fight for independence. And the Bill of Rights is only drafted because the states were threatening to become independent, and then therefore they drafted the Bill of Rights in order for everybody to continue to stay in union. Now, what I'm trying to say throughout this, understanding this whole history of rights, we see that in all 3 cases, whether it's in Britain, whether it's in France, whether it's in America, centralized power had to be conceded in order for rights to be given to the individual. I say again, throughout history, you will see this thing, that centralized power, you will only concede such power, okay, when the individuals fight for such rights and gain such rights. You have to win the fight in order to gain the right. That's what I'm trying to say. So I repeat this key idea about rights that we all must have, that rights is always a matter of contention. And so, essentially, when we think about rights, you have to think about it in a way that it's like a commercial exchange. It's like, it's always dependent on who has the stronger bargaining power. And in a way, to gain such rights, most of the time, you have to depend on force. So I agree with those who believe that rights only become rights if it can be claimed. If you can't claim it, this right is meaningless, because this right is only exists in your head. You don't have the power to enforce the right. This right doesn't exist. This is what many believed. However, in order to gain a right, it will mean what? Since it's an exchange, it will mean that somebody will be losing the power to this right, isn't it? If I have this right, that means another person will have to lose this right. When one gains a right, it means that another person must lose. So, for example, when women in America, they gain the right to vote, who loses? The men, right? The men will lose in terms of their, the voting rights will be diluted. And so this explains why, you talk about the land of rights, women voting rights is only legalized in the 1920s after World War I, right? When women start to gain power in society, that's when they also gain their voting rights. Now, just to be clear, I'm not against women voting rights, so please don't come and bash me. I support women, all right? But I'm going through this long process. I hope now you have fallen asleep. I'm going through this long process just so that we are very clear on the negative side of the nature of right. So it's not, in a way, it's not right or wrong. It's just the nature of it, all right? that inevitably it will be a matter of contention. So just imagine if now I want to take away a right from you, right? What will you do? I want to take away some right from you. You will surely fight tooth and nail over it, right? And therefore, what happens is, imagine this happening for 200 years. 200 years of arguing over rights have perpetuated things like individualism. So individualism has been much accentuated through this. The not in my backyard mentality, and other forms of self-centered behavior. All this happens when we continue to talk about rights. And in a way, I find it ironic, if you have been watching what is going on in the American presidential election, both sides now claim to be the defender of freedom. Or this side talk about, we defend your freedom. Another side also say we defend your freedom. So it's quite ironic, right? Essentially, they want your vote. Vote for me, I will protect you. I will protect your rights. That's what they're saying. And I really miss the spirit of, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Who said that? Kennedy, right? Yeah, that's the good old days. And I want to remind you also of what Kennedy said in the next line. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America can do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of men. I really miss the spirit of such. So what we have done so far is that we have analyzed the positives, but also the negative sides of rights. I think to help us think theologically, I want to use a story from the Bible. And I hope this story will really help us Christians, help us think about how do we resolve this? How do we preserve the good, but at the same time we can help to resolve some of the negative side of this rights language. This story comes from Paul speaking to the Corinthian church in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Okay, let's do this in responsive reading. So I'll read one line, and then you all respond with the next line before you all fall asleep, all right? I'll read one line, you all respond with the next line. Now this is my defense to those who sit in judgment on me. Don't we have a right to take a believing wife along with us, as do other apostles and the Lord's brothers and Cephas? Cephas is Peter. I have not used any of these rights. And am I not writing this in the hope that you will do such things? And I'm not writing this in the hope that you will do such things for me. For I would rather die than to allow anyone to deprive me of this boast. I do all this for the sake of the gospel, that I may share in its blessings. So what is the story here that Paul is trying to say? Now let me give you some quick background to the passage before we dwell deeper to talk about the rights again, the idea of rights. So what happened is that during Paul's times, missionaries often depend on the hospitality of the local churches as they travel from place to place to spread the gospel, right? So if I come to Tiong Bahru, I would, rely on the hospitality of Jubilee Church. If I go to another place, I rely on the hospitality over there. This is how I try to survive, okay? And it's very common for them to therefore expect this support from this community. You can say that it is their right to receive this material help because they are doing the Lord's work. But Paul did something unusual in Corinth, all right, when he was in Corinth with the Corinthian church. He chose not to use his right when he was in Corinth. He believed that in Corinth, okay, by offering the gospel free of charge, it will help with the gospel, all right? The message will be received more openly and without any hindrance. So this is a special case that happened when he was spreading the gospel in Corinth. Now, why did Paul suddenly bring up this matter in the Corinthian church? He wasn't making a case that he wants some material support. He said, hey, I didn't take any money, now I want to charge interest. He wasn't saying any of that. He was using his own example to encourage some of the Corinthians to consider giving up their right to eat meat. So in the Corinthian church, there was some fight over whether you should eat meat or not, all right? And in a way, those who claim that they have the right to eat meat, in a way they are theologically correct, all right? So they do have this right, just to be clear. But he wants to encourage these Corinthian Christians, in which since you see how I give up my right, I hope that you too can also think about giving up your right. This is what Paul says in chapter 11. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. Follow my example as I follow the example of Christ. The issue here was that in insisting their right to eat meat, okay, these people, they might cause other people who are weaker in their faith, those who don't understand, they're theologically not as strong, it will cause these people to stumble. So instead of, insisting their right and making these people stumble, Paul says that maybe you should think about giving up your right. So now I want all of you to imagine, all right? Imagine now Paul is asking you to give up the right to eat meat. Or some of you might think about crucifying Paul, right? Well, tell me not to eat meat for my... Oh, I cannot crucify Paul. So Paul was using his own example to teach the Corinthians something about how Christians should think about right. Because every time we think, oh, it's my right, how can I give it up? But yet Paul is, I'm hoping, renewing our minds and thinking about this matter of rights in a different way. And this should lead us to a key takeaway about rights. What did Paul say? Paul said that we should not always seek our own good, but the good of others. Paul reminds us, yes, we have the right to do anything, but not everything is beneficial. You have the right to do anything, but not everything is constructive. Can we read this together? No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Paul's message, I think, is relevant to all of us as we start to think about how to deal with the positives and negatives of rights. It's relevant to our conversation because there's often this tension in society. Those who focus on individual rights, and we call these people the libertarians, all right, libertarians, because they say all individuals should have more rights. But there are also who prioritize the collective good. Hey, let's think about others. And we call these people the communitarians. So it's always the libertarians fighting against the communitarians. I believe that Paul's message here about considering the good of others will lean towards the communitarians, which is, hey, let's think about everybody instead of always just thinking about yourself. We must always ask this question: is insisting on a right truly beneficial for the community? And I believe if we think more and more like that, maybe we can help to resolve a lot of the conflicts, a lot of what we see as contentious today. But I must note that Paul did not dismiss the idea of rights altogether. He said, hey, good for everybody, so you all don't think about your own rights. Paul never said that, just to make this very clear. In fact, Paul goes all out of the way to affirm the necessity of rights, including the right to receive this support. He even quoted Moses, all right, to say that, hey, if the cows can eat in the field, then I have the right to claim this material right from support from you. Essentially, he spends 1/3 of chapter 9 just talking about the importance of this right. He essentially upholds the value of rights, especially for those who are vulnerable, those who lack support. Imagine if the missionary go, and how is he to survive if he doesn't have any support to live? So in a way, you can see that Paul is a great supporter of rights. His argument about fair compensation can also be used today when we talk about workers' rights. in today's society. So, in a way, it might seem like a contradiction now. You say, Paul, you say on one hand, you want to uphold rights. And on the other hand, you say that we should give it up. So should we uphold or should we give up? Actually, these two ideas can work together. Rights are important in protecting the individual from the oppression. But insisting on the rights is not always the best course of action. I say again, rights are important to protect individuals from oppression, but insisting on those rights, that is not always the best course of action. There are times in which we should voluntarily let go of our rights if it serves a greater good, it helps to benefit others, or it helps to advance the gospel. Maybe these are the times you should think about, should we really insist on these rights? Paul's examples show us that while it's important to have rights, wisdom lies in knowing when to use them and when to set them aside for the sake of others. Now, I want to say one last thing about this topic of rights. Many times in today's society, when we think about rights, those people who are fighting for rights think that they have the moral high ground. Wow, you Christians, wow, you always trample on the rights of others. Wow, but not like me, I'm on the moral high ground. I help people to fight for rights so that, they have more freedom in their lives, blah, blah, blah. A lot of times, when we're talking about rights, these people who fight for rights think that they have the moral high ground. But I want to say this, okay? A conflict over rights should always be the last resort for Christians. It's not the moral high ground. In fact, it's when we bo pian, then you talk about rights. You see that in Paul's case, okay, he went on to talk about rights, okay, only because everybody wants to insist on their rights. He says, okay, you want to talk about rights? Let's talk about rights. Then in a way, then he talk about it. The real thing he wants to talk about is found later in chapter 13. What is 1 Corinthians chapter 13? Love. That's the real thing he wants to talk about. It makes sense because when we talk about rights, argue who has the actual right, it often leads to a situation where either you have the majority, so you win because you have more power, or maybe it's a very split community. Then whoever is the minority that can so-called play kingmaker, that minority will have dominance. It's always like this. So whoever has more power, that's the one that wins. But in both ways, whether it's a dominant majority or a kingmaker minority, that community becomes what? In a way, it becomes the oppressor, right, to the community. And you can oppress over whoever has less power, the losing party. So we Christians, we must recognize that everybody loses in a needless fight. Do we really need to fight? Especially when constructive conversation can become the better alternative. Isn't it so? A lot of the conflicts, contentions, fights, is it really the moral high ground? What is the moral high ground? I believe love is the moral high ground. I believe that we must first talk and find a win-win solution. Instead of focusing solely on rights, the Christian perspective should always emphasize on virtues like love, peace, gentleness. You ask me what's the moral high ground? I would say the moral high ground is kindness. The moral high ground is compassion. The moral high ground is the willingness to accept one another. Whenever there's a disagreement, we should come together to work out a win-win solution for all. So what can we do as the church? We can start by reframing conversations. This is how we can be light and salt of the world. Think less about rights, what rights we are entitled to, and so on and so forth, and more about the responsibilities that we have for one another. How do we care and make sure everybody is well taken care of? That should be our first mindset. That's the moral high ground. We can seek to understand different perspectives, find common ground, rather than immediately asserting our rights, whether it's this person right, that person right, who should have the right over this. Finally, let's remember Paul's example. Sometimes the greatest impact comes not from asserting our rights, but from voluntarily relinquishing for the greater good of the community and for the glory of God. Let us pray. Our Father in heaven, we come before you. Lord, we ask for your love, because it is your love that can help to reconcile all of us. Reconcile all the rights and wrongs. Reconcile all the sins in our hearts. Our greed, our pride, our self-centeredness. Help us love, Lord, for love can overcome a multitude of sins. Help us be the peacemaker in this world, transforming this world to be more like you, a world of sacrificial love. And all this we pray in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ. Amen. We can greet one another in peace. Okay. Is there anyone who is here for the first time? Please stand for us to welcome you. Anyone here for the first time? Oh, welcome, welcome. Oh, behind as well. Welcome. Okay, please sit seated. Thank you. We welcome you. Okay, announcements. Okay, just a reminder that this is the season for evangelism. Our happiness groups have started already. Next week, next slide. Okay, so there are 5 cell groups, and they are all ready to welcome people to share the gospel with new believers or seekers as well. No video, right? Okay, all right. Okay, so next slide. This is, be reminded, the last Sunday of this month, the 20th, which is 2 weeks from now, is an Evangelistic Sunday. So do keep your friends and families, members who are non-Christians in prayer, and invite them, all right? So we will send out this e-invite to every member of the church. So when you receive this, do share it with a non-believer around you and invite them to come. Okay, on the 29th of September, the speaker is Sister Wan Ling here, and she will share about life with God. And this is an evangelistic message, and we hope there will be people who will come. Don't just pray for your non-believer friends and family, but also pray for this service so that people may come and to ready to receive the gospel. And you might ask, what about those that only listen to Chinese? Can I bring them? Yes. Next slide. Okay. So at the Chinese service on the same Sunday, Liu Yijiang Mushi will be sharing also an evangelistic message as well. So if your non-believer friend or family listen in Chinese, you can bring them to the Chinese side. If they listen in English, you can bring them here. So on the 29th of September, 2 weeks from now, it will be our Evangelistic Sunday. Next one. So those that wants to attend the Thanksgiving Luncheon at the end of the year, be reminded to buy the tickets for the luncheon. So half of the tickets have already been sold, all right? And we cannot add more because our level 2 only can accommodate so many tables, all right? So if you want, you are reminded to buy your tickets as early as possible. Once it's sold out, we cannot offer anymore, all right? Otherwise, I don't know, you have to sit at the car park, cannot, huh? So that's the way it is. Okay, next one. Okay, so I think we have announced about the scholarship fund already. We hope there will be more young people to come forward, to go for full-time theological studies. I still remember that when it was time for me to study, it's actually the next youngest pastor was actually 20 years old away from me. So I was thinking in my mind, wow, there seems to be a generation gap in the pastoral team. And that is what motivated me to serve full-time. And now that I have served 22 years already, there's no one younger than me in the pastoral team, all right? So I said it as a matter of factly, that if this goes on, the whole batch will just retire without anyone taking over. So that's the truth. So now is the time, really. Now is the time for people to come forward and to serve as the next generation in the pastoral team. And that's the reason why we are having this fundraising. During my time, we have the church pays for our school fees and also give us a small allowance. But we know that if you have a lot of needs at home, then you have to find your funds somewhere. But this time is different, all right? We want to tell everybody who comes to study full-time, maybe you're married already, maybe you have young kids, you do have financial burdens, and we acknowledge that. So this fundraising, we are going to raise a big amount so that we don't just pay for your school fees, but we also hope to alleviate your living expenses in a substantial way, all right? So if you do come single, we will pay for your needs. If you come married or even with young kids, we will also give you a substantial allowance so that you can come worry-free. And this is why we are doing this fundraising. We want all young people to come forward to serve the church in full-time ministry. I don't have that many years to go, so do think about this. I hope this is an appeal to all of you. All right, let's go on. Next slide. Okay, immediately after this service, all right, you have 15 minutes. Get ready to go to level 5. There will be sharing by Reverend Enoch, and I think he has a panel ready. All right, so the topic will be weaving prayers into your daily life. I hope all of you can stay back and listen to the pastoral research sharing. Next one. So children camp, continue to sign up. If you don't have young children, then sign up as a volunteer. All right. I think that's all the announcements. Okay. Library books to be given away for free is right outside. So do take one home to read. Okay. The book shall be yours. All right. Thank you.